This is Irene Finlayson on behalf of Cheltenham Local History Society, speaking to Anne Warne about the relocation of an organisation called UCCA from London to Cheltenham 50 years ago in 1968. Anne was a committee secretary with UCCA and also involved in personnel matters. So Anne, could you tell us first of all please a bit about UCCA and its operation in London?
Yes, during the 1950s, the universities started to hold discussions about setting up a central admission system. This was due to two factors at that time, which was what they called the trend, which was a trend for more young people to apply for higher education, and also the expected bulge from the baby boom just after the war, which will come about in the 1960s. And they finally agreed a system of centralised applications and admissions around about 1960, and the office was established in London in 1961, and preparations were made for the first year to operate 62-63 entry. The first year was a trial year, and whereas now the universities, the applicants apply, universities send the decisions and the applicants reply to those. The first year, applications were received for all faculties, but the full service only applied to one faculty, the technology faculty. It was a trial year to test it, to see how it worked. Well, at the end of that year, it was quite clear that in order to handle the increased number of applications, it would be necessary to computerise the system. It was at that time running on a punch card system. And as a result of that, it was obvious that we needed more accommodation than we had at present. We were actually situated in an 1820s built house in Bloomsbury, which wasn't really suitable for the type of operation we were running, but it was the only one available at the time that the office was set up, and it was leased from the University of London, so it was convenient.
Right, so that was the establishment in London, but obviously there came a time when a decision was made to look at relocating to other
Yes,
places.
That's correct. Well, this was really started almost immediately after the first trial year. We had to find accommodation for a computer, and that was also for accommodation leased from the University of London, a disused warehouse. And this proved not very satisfactory, operating from two different sites. There was also the difficulty in recruiting and retaining staff. It's very full employment in the 1960s, and you would interview someone for a post, they'd accept it, and then on the day they just didn't turn up. That was providing they accepted in the first place. So we had difficulty in recruiting staff, and also there was a further expansion which had been suggested by the Department of Education and the University Grants Committee, that UCCA should take on the management or the development and management of a national statistical database which would hold statistics of both university staff and students, and this was became known as the University Statistical Record, USR. So that would involve, this was would be a huge database, therefore involved quite a lot of additional staff and accommodation. So that was another factor in looking for further expanded accommodation.
And were there particular areas you were looking at, and if so, why did Cheltenham come out on top?
There was a push from the government at the time for companies to relocate out of London. I think there was actually a bureau called the Location Officers Bureau. And I looked this up actually because I wasn't quite sure of the details. I knew it had something to do with this Location of Officers Bureau, but it was actually a government policy not to allow expansion within the London area. Yeah. So if you wanted to, you couldn't build and you couldn't expand. And so I think this was another factor in UCCA deciding to move out of the London area. There were several places that were suggested, I think, on the government list, which included Newcastle, Harrogate, Basildon, and Reading was another one, and Cheltenham.
And were there particular reasons why the committee decided on Cheltenham?
Yes, they wanted an attractive area that would encourage key staff to move out of London into the new location. And I think, to be quite honest, I don't think many London-based staff would have moved as far as Newcastle. There was also thought that Reading was another one that was on the list, but it was thought not that UCCA should not be associated with one particular university. There was a university in Reading. And also there was accommodation available at once in Cheltenham, which was in Rodney Road and had previously been occupied by Eagle Star before they moved into the tower. And the one interesting snippet of information was that the cost per square foot of the accommodation or the offices in Rodney Road was 17 shillings sixpence, or 85 pence.
Yes.
And this was rather similar to the rents in Newcastle, but the building in Rodney Road was thought to be much more suitable than equivalent buildings in Newcastle. So I think the decisions had finally come down to either Newcastle or Cheltenham, and Cheltenham was chosen.
Yes. Cheltenham didn't have a university at that time, of course, did it?
No, it didn't. I think it had made a bid for a university, but wasn't successful, and so UCCA was the next best thing.
And how did the staff who were based in London and who presumably were, the company was hoping would move through, how did they feel about Cheltenham?
Well, I think that they were mostly certainly the married staff thought it were quite happy to come to Cheltenham because it was a lovely environment in the Cotswolds and a nice place to settle down with their families and their children. And certainly there was no lack of enthusiasm for those of the key staff to come and work here. The other attraction, of course, was that there were good schools and also housing available, which was much cheaper than living in the London area. I mean, for me personally, I was relatively young and I'm married, and I thought it was a good opportunity for me to actually make a start and buy my own house, on the property ladder, of course. Was quite unusual in those days for young single women.
Yes, yes, excellent. And I take it you also knew that you'd probably have to recruit staff in Cheltenham as well.
Yes, we set up an office in Cheltenham, which some of us came down from time to time to interview staff. We also had a member of staff who lived in Cheltenham. He was recruited from Cheltenham, but he came and spent some time in London with us to see what the operation was like. And then he was here permanently and able to interview staff, or at least if not actually offer them work, then he could sift through the applications and in time for those of us who came down to actually interview and offer employment. we were quite lucky insofar that there were, at that time, both GCHQ and the RAF in Gloucester were making some cuts in staffing, so we were able to pick up quite a lot of clerical staff from GCHQ and punch card operators from the RAF in Gloucester.
Was the council helpful?
It was very helpful, yes. We had, they welcomed, I didn't actually go on this trip, but they had a trip for all staff, that whether they had actually decided to move or not, came to Cheltenham for a day, and they were taken around by the council on a coach to show them the various housing estates and the schools and other places of interest. I don't know why I didn't go on that, but I think I must have been on holiday at the time.
You missed out.
But I missed out on that, but I heard all about it. And of course that was another reason, having come to the town and seen it, that many people decided, yes, this is where they'd like to be.
Right. So that was a positive experience.
It was
for
a
them.
positive
They
experience,
did find
yes.
it.
And also the council was very helpful insofar that they would offer, they had some council flats that were vacant at the time, mostly in the Princess Elizabeth Way. I think they had originally been built for GCHQ staff who had gradually moved out into their own properties. And so they were able to make these flats available, not necessarily long-term, but at least short-term, until people were able to decide whereabouts they wanted to live in the town and then move on.
Yes. Right. Oh, that must have been helpful.
Yes.
Did the council provide a lot of information in terms of amenities and facilities and things to do in Cheltenham?
Yes, they did. Yes, they also alerted the estate agents to the fact that there'd be an influx of people. Yes. In the event, 29 members of staff moved. Some of them with their wives. And that was out of a total London staff of 82.
Were you pleased with that? Was that a number you thought?
Yes, we were pleased with it, because the people, the key staff, were mainly the ones that decided to come. And a lot of the staff that we employed in London were in fact not the 82. The 82 were permanent staff, but we also had extra staff who were employed on a temporary basis. And this was, and obviously they would not want to have moved from the capital. But the 29 that moved seemed to settle in very well and were quite happy. There were only 2, I think, that after a few months decided that Cheltenham wasn't quite for them and went back.
Right.
And now, most obviously, all of those people that moved in 50 years ago have retired.
Yes.
And they're still living here.
Yes. Oh, right.
Those that are still alive.
Yes. So obviously it was a successful move in many ways then,
yes,
from the point of view of
yes.
people. Did you have much contact with other firms in the area before you came?
Mainly with Eagle Star, I think. Another factor that had to be looked at wherever we moved was the availability of data processing services within the area. So if there were other companies with similar services that we could go to if we needed backup at any time. Yes. In those days, with the computer, we back up everything on tape, and that would be taken every night to Eagle Star, who would look after it for us in case we had a computer crash.
Yes. Oh, well, that obviously worked out well.
Yes.
Did you ever have a crash?
Occasionally.
Oh, well. Did you have any kind of official opening?
Yes, we had. We moved in the summer of '68, and half of the staff moved to Cheltenham in September, and the rest of us in October, to start the operation for the '69 entry. And we had an official opening in November, I think it was. The mayor came, the town clerk, as he was known then, Mr. Crabtree. And we had that in Rodney Road, in the Rodney House in Rodney Road.
Yes, good. So did it make the local newspaper? Do you remember?
Oh yes, it did.
Yes,
it was in the local newspaper.
Yes.
And it was quite an event, I think, with Ucker moving to Cheltenham.
Oh yes.
Local people.
Yes. Yes, it would be a bit of an unknown organisation, I suppose, to many people at the time.
Yes, although this was 1968, and the Ucker had started in 62, 63. So certainly from the point of view of most of the younger people anyway, they knew about Ucker.
Yes.
And it was quite surprising how many people did know exactly what Ucker was about.
Did you ever get people knocking on your door?
Not applicants. For many years, we didn't publish our address. We were just a P.O. box. And this was really to discourage applicants from coming. But we did get visitors, obviously from the universities, would come and visit us from time to time. And also from other countries. We would get, I remember we had a delegation from Canada, one from Australia, coming to see how the central admissions system worked, because I think that it's true to say that Ucker was first in the world. There was a clearinghouse for teacher training before that, but for the central university clearing system, it was the first in the world, so we were trailblazers in a way.
That was quite a coup for Cheltenham then to have it established here in the way that it was, because it grew from strength to strength thereafter, didn't it?
Oh yes.
So, can you tell us something, Anne, about how it was for you personally, actually moving here and settling in and finding things to do outside of work?
Yes, I was really very pleasantly surprised. It was moving to a small town after living all my life in London or the London area. Coming to a small town was almost like living in a village where everybody knew everyone else. They'd all been to school together, worked together in many cases, and really looked after their neighbours. It was quite different atmosphere from living in a large city. Also, of course, travelling to and from work. In London, it would add a couple of hours at least onto your day, if not more. And also, of course, there was a matter of getting through the rush hour in the mornings and the evenings. So often, certainly in the evenings, it was better just to stay in the office until the rush hour was over and then go home. Whereas here in Cheltenham, a short bus ride away or drive if you drove, and it didn't matter how long you stayed working overtime, you were home at a reasonable hour. And it was also the pace of life was much slower, and that was very noticeable to me. Everything went at a slower rate, and even people walking along the pavements, it was very noticeable. And of course it was wonderful to, in one's spare time, to just outside, get into the countryside and walk in the hills. It was really quite an experience. When I first came to Cheltenham, I thought I'll probably stay here a couple of years and then go back to London. But having got here, I met my husband and stayed. But I think I would have stayed anyway.
Yes. So despite all the obvious amenities of London and the entertainment available there, the galleries, museums.
Yes. Well,
you didn't miss that.
I didn't miss it. I was very much most evening. I talked about missing the rush hour after leaving the office, but many evenings I didn't go home until later anyway, because I was going to the theatre or concerts in London. I did think I'd miss that, But of course there's a lot of that sort of thing happening in Cheltenham now, then as now, certainly with music and concerts. And also I had the privilege of having to go to London, or at least once a month, for meetings, which often involved an overnight stay. And so I was able to continue with my pursuits in London as well for a time.
Yeah. Yes.
But there certainly, and the other thing about Cheltenham, of course, is that being a small town, once you get involved in going to concerts or the theatre, then you start to meet more people and make more friends than you would in a larger city.
Yes. Yes, and it sounds as though you found Cheltenham to be pretty friendly anyway.
Yes.
From what you say.
Yes. So. Yes, there was, I think when we first started working, there was a bit of them and us attitude between the, I won't say the Cheltonians, but between the Gloucestershire people and those of us who'd moved from London. And I suppose that was natural because the Londoners knew each other and tended to congregate together and socialise together.
It's natural.
And so I think that was natural, but it didn't last long.
Yes. Yeah. People integrated
They
pretty well.
integrated fairly well, yes.
Yeah. And would you say that the establishment of UCCA in Cheltenham had an impact on Cheltenham in any other way?
Well, I do know that I was told by a post office representative that had UCCA not moved to Cheltenham, the post office, sorting office in Cheltenham would probably have closed because there was so much traffic coming from UCCA that it wasn't practical to close it. So that was one impact that it had.
Yes. And of course, was there not another organisation which was set up to work for the polytechnics?
Oh, that was PCAS, which came in the mid-1980s.
And did it set up in Cheltenham because you were there?
That set up in Cheltenham because we were there. It was decided that it would be, it wasn't economic for the polytechnics to set up a parallel system in the sense that they'd have all their own equipment, and so it was agreed that UCCA would take on the operational side of the polytechnic system and manage it they would use our computer and all of the other photocopying facilities. We would do that for PCAS on an agency basis. So obviously they needed to be close to the office, to the UCCA office. And they took up a residence in the in Oriel Lodge. And it was at that stage that some thought was given to moving out of Rodney Road. I think the lease was coming to the end anyway. There was the expansion now of PCAS, and for very similar reasons for the move from London, we needed more accommodation, and that was when Fulton House was built. I think it's called Festival House now, but it was originally Fulton House, named after the UCCA's first chairman, Lord Fulton, and that was built in St James's Square, which had been Jessup Avenue in St James's Square, which had been the old railway station. And after the railway station closed, I think it had been a car park, so we built the house there. I did look up in order to compare the price per square foot of Rodney Road with the Fulton House in 1989. It is slightly different because it was not leased, but the site, which was 1.5 acres, was sold to us by the council for £750,000, and the building of the offices cost £3.3 million.
Gosh. Yes, quite a difference.
So it's quite a difference, yes. But obviously that 3.3 million was met partly from UCCA's own reserves and partly from a bank loan. but obviously that building was owned by UCCA, so although it sounds a lot of money to lay out in one go, it wasn't a yearly rental as we had been.
And it was an asset you had.
And it was an asset,
wasn't it?
yes.
So I think UCCA and PCAS eventually merged, is that correct?
Yes, that was, I think that was always the intention. Originally, we had two separate application forms, but then within a couple of years or so it was decided to have a joint application form, so applicants made their applications on a form for both the traditional universities and the polytechnics on the same form. And then when the polytechnics became universities, the decision was taken to merge the two, and it became UCAS.
And such it remains today, of course.
And such it remains
in yet another building, a different building.
Yes. We moved again in, I think 1993, I think it was, 1993 to Rose Hill in Prestbury.
Yes. And did UCCA and then UCAS, did they become involved with the wider community in any way in Cheltenham?
Well, UCCA didn't so much because of its constitution. Any profits that it made had to be ploughed back into the office, and so they weren't able to do very much in the way of supporting the festivals, for example. But when it became UCAS with a different constitution, then they were able to support some of the festivals, and I think in fact it was Tony Higgins was quite instrumental in starting the Science Festival, which was new. When I came here, it was just the Literature Festival and the Music Festival for many years, and then Jazz Festival came along, and then the Science Festival.
Yes. So the organisation brought both employment to Cheltenham and possibly a bit of support for there being a university here eventually, and also some obviously community activities as well.
Yes,
was all part of it. Well, thank you very much, Anne. That's been very interesting, and I'm sure a lot of people will find it interesting to know about that as well. Thank you.
Thank you.